November 4th, 1979. A mob smashes through the gates of the American embassy in Tehran. They seize 52 Americans, holding them captive for 444 agonizing days. The world watches, horrified, as Iran screams its hatred for the United States.
Death to America!
But that fury didn't erupt from nothing. To understand the seeds of this rage, you have to unlock a dark secret buried for 26 years. A secret about a nation's stolen dream. And the American spies who stole their dream. Before the theocracy of today, the Iran of the early 1950s was a beacon of democracy in the Middle East. Its leader was a charismatic, democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mosaddegh. His mission, which swept him to power, was to take back Iran's most precious resource, its oil. For decades, Iran's oil had been controlled by a single British corporation, now known as BP. Billions in profits were funneled to London, while the Iranian people were left with scraps. Mosaddegh called it a national humiliation. In 1951, he committed the ultimate sin in the eyes of the West. He nationalized the oil industry, declaring Iran's wealth would finally belong to the Iranian people. The nation celebrated. It was a declaration of independence in some ways, but Mosaddegh had just signed his own death warrant. Britain was furious, but at the height of the Cold War, the United States was watching with paranoid eyes, terrified that an independent Iran could fall to the Soviet Union. It didn't matter that Mosaddegh was anti-communist. The fear was enough. After a crippling economic boycott failed, London begged the Americans for help. President Truman refused to plot a coup, but when President Eisenhower entered the White House, the answer became yes. In 1953, the CIA greenlit a covert mission to overthrow Iran's democratically elected leader. Its codename, Operation Ajax. The man sent to orchestrate the plot was CIA agent Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson to President Teddy Roosevelt. The operation was a masterclass in dirty tricks. The CIA flooded Iran with cash, bribing politicians, soldiers, and journalists. They churned out relentless propaganda, painted the beloved prime minister as a secret communist to terrify the country's religious leaders. They even paid thugs to pose as communists in riots, creating the illusion of a country descending into chaos. Iran's monarch, the Shah, trembled at crossing his popular prime minister, but the CIA had him in their grip. He signed the decrees to fire Mosaddegh. When Mosaddegh refused the illegal order, the CIA manufactured chaos, and it was unleashed. For days, the streets of Tehran ran with blood. Finally, on August 19, 1953, the military stormed Mossaddegh's home. As a result, Iran's democratic light was snuffed out. Mosaddegh was arrested, and hope was lost for the Iranians. The Shah, who had fled the country, was flown back to rule as an absolute dictator. And the oil? A new consortium was formed, and for shattering a nation's dream, American companies were rewarded with a massive 40% share of its oil. The 1953 coup unleashed a tyrant. For the next 25 years, the Shah ruled with an iron fist, his throne built and maintained by Washington. American money and weapons poured in to keep their man in power. To millions of Iranians, the Shah was an American puppet, a festering reminder of the stolen democracy. To cling to power, the Shah created a secret police so terrifying it was names spoken only in whispers. Savak. Forged by the CIA and Israeli intelligence, Savak became a machine of pure terror. Any dissident was obliterated. Students, artists, and poets vanished into dungeons to be systematically tortured. Holy Moly! While the Shah pushed a campaign of Western-style modernization, the oil wealth never reached the people. A tiny, corrupt elite crew, obscenely rich, flaunted a lifestyle that was an insult to ordinary Iranians. The mix of grotesque inequality, brutal repression, and the feeling that their culture was being erased created a deep well of hatred. By backing the Shah, Americans had chained its own reputation to its tyrant. By the late 1970s, Iran was a ticking time bomb. The Shah regime was rotting from the inside. In 1978, massive protests erupted. It was a perfect storm of fury, rage and savage torture people, a collapsing economy, and decades of bitterness over American meddling. From the shadows, a voice of vengeance emerged. The exiled cleric Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. For years his sermons had railed against the Shah and his servitude to America. His message was like gasoline in the fire. The Ayatollah offered a vision of Iran's Islamic Republic, fiercely independent and free from the foreign clutches of America. On January 16, 1979, the Shah fled from Iran forever. 2 weeks later, the Ayatollah returned to a hero's welcome. The revolution had triumphed. For the Iranians, it was pure ecstasy. They had reclaimed the sovereignty stolen in 1953. For the United States, it was a catastrophe. At the heart of the new republic was a hostility toward one nation. The Ayatollah gave it the name, the Great Satan. And the original sin he hammered home again and again was the CIA coup in 1953. The revolution was won, but the thirst for vengeance remained. In October 1979, the U.S. made a fatal error. President Carter allowed the exiled, cancer-stricken Shah into America for medical treatment. In Tehran, it was the ultimate betrayal. It looked as if America was again protecting the monsters who had brutalized their country, and many feared a new CIA plot to put him back on the throne. Vengeance was coming. On November 4, 1979, radical students stormed the U.S. Embassy, the very symbol of their nation's humiliation, where the 1953 coup was born. They seized 52 Americans as hostages. The Ayatollah called it the Second Revolution. The demand was simple: send the Shah back to Iran to face justice. The U.S. refused. For 444 agonizing days, the crisis was a global obsession. Nightly news showed the blindfolded Americans and enraged crowds chanting "Death to America." The crisis paralyzed Carter's presidencies, and daring military rescue ended in humiliation, disaster in the Iranian desert. For the Iranians, holding the hostages was righteous revenge for 1953. The crisis ended on January 20th, 1981, moments after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president. A final calculated slap in the face of a humble superpower. For many Americans, the nightmare began in 1979 with an embassy taking over. But for the Iranians, the true nightmare began in 1953 with the destruction of the democracy by a foreign superpower. If you want to understand more of the complex histories that shape our world, consider subscribing and let me know in the comments what other conflicts you'd like me to explore.